History remembers kings, traitors, and criminals, but how they faced death is just as telling. Some begged for mercy, some died cursing their executioners, and others left behind chilling words that echoed long after their heads fell. The final moments of a condemned person reveal more about their character than a lifetime of actions. These are the darkest last words ever spoken before execution, statements of defiance, prophecy, regret, and rage that continue to disturb us today. What would you say if you knew your next breath might be your last? These individuals face that question, and their answers will chill you to the core. Kings and queens live extraordinary lives, but in death, they face the same mortality as any commoner. Perhaps that's why their final moments fascinate us so deeply, watching how the mighty fall. In January 1793, King Louis XVI of France approached the newly constructed guillotine in the Place de la Révolution. The crowd that had gathered to witness history, the first execution of a French king, fell silent as he prepared to address them one last time. "I die innocent of all the crimes imputed to me," Louis declared, his voice steady despite the circumstances. "I pardon those who have occasioned my death, and I pray that the blood you are about to shed will never be required at France's hands." His words carried a prophetic weight. As if sensing he might be interrupted, Louis rushed through his final statement. He was right to hurry. Moments later, drums began to beat loudly, drowning out the rest of his speech on orders from authorities who feared his words might sway the crowd. Louis was quickly strapped to the board and positioned under the blade. Seconds later, the executioner Charles-Henri Sanson lifted the king's severed head by the hair, showing it to the crowd. The gathered revolutionaries cheered, but Louis's warning about bloodshed would prove prescient. Within months, the reign of terror would begin, claiming thousands of lives, including many who had celebrated the king's execution. More than 2 centuries earlier, another royal faced death with extraordinary composure. Mary, Queen of Scots, had spent 19 years imprisoned by her cousin Queen Elizabeth I, before being sentenced to death for treason in 1587. On the morning of her execution at Fotheringhay Castle, Mary entered the Great Hall dressed entirely in black, except for a white veil. After her servants removed her outer garments, she revealed a crimson petticoat, the color of martyrdom in the Catholic faith. It was a calculated final statement, positioning herself as a martyr rather than a traitor. When the executioner knelt before her asking forgiveness, as was customary, Mary replied simply, "I forgive you with all my heart. For now I hope you shall make an end of all my troubles." What followed was one of history's most botched royal executions. The first strike of the axe missed her neck, striking the back of her head. The second blow failed to sever her head completely. It took a third stroke, and some sawing with the axe, before her head was finally separated from her body. When the executioner lifted Mary's head and proclaimed the traditional "God save the Queen," witnesses were horrified to see the head fall from his grasp, revealing that Mary had been wearing a wig. Her actual hair, cut short and completely grey despite her being only 44, tumbled to the floor, her final secret exposed in death. Not all nobles faced death with such dignity. In 1685, James Scott, Duke of Monmouth, the illegitimate son of King Charles II, who had led a failed rebellion against King James II, approached the block with terror evident in his eyes. Having witnessed the botched execution of Lord Russell 2 years earlier by the same executioner Jack Ketch, Monmouth tried to ensure a cleaner death for himself. He gave Ketch 6 guineas, saying, "Do not hack me as you did my Lord Russell. I have always had a great aversion to being a butcher." Ketch, either through incompetence or malice, proceeded to inflict precisely the horror Monmouth had tried to avoid. The first blow of the axe failed to sever his neck, so did the second, third, and fourth. By the 5th attempt, with Monmouth still conscious and in agony, Ketch had to finish the job with a butcher's knife. While royalty often used their last words to maintain dignity or assert innocence, common criminals faced death differently, sometimes with defiance that turned them into legends. Few embodied this spirit better than Edward Teach, better known as Blackbeard, perhaps history's most notorious pirate. In 1718, when Lieutenant Robert Maynard's naval forces finally cornered Blackbeard off the coast of North Carolina, the pirate had no intention of surrendering. As Maynard's men boarded his ship, Blackbeard roared his final declaration, "Damnation seize my soul if I give you quarter, or take any from you." True to his word, he fought with savage intensity, suffering 5 gunshot wounds and over 20 sword cuts before finally falling. Even in death, Blackbeard left a final message. His severed head was hung from Maynard's bowsprit as a warning to other pirates, while his body was thrown into the ocean. Legend claims his headless corpse swam around the ship 3 times before sinking into the depths. Not all criminals chose defiance. Some faced death with eerie calm that unsettled witnesses more than any rage could have. When William Kemmler became the first person sentenced to die in the electric chair in 1890, he approached his historic execution with unsettling serenity. As guards strapped him into the strange new device at Auburn Prison in New York, Kemmler addressed the witnesses. "Gentlemen, I wish everyone all the good luck in the world. I believe I'm going to a good place. I'll see you all in the next world." What followed was not the quick death promoters of the electric chair had promised, but a prolonged horror. The first jolt failed to kill Kemmler, leaving him unconscious but still breathing. As the prison doctor exclaimed, "Great God, he's still alive," officials scrambled to restart the electricity. The second application of current caused Kemmler's blood vessels to rupture and his body to catch fire. One witness later wrote that it was an awful spectacle, far worse than hanging. Kemmler's calm final words, followed by such a gruesome death, cast a pall over the new humane execution method. Religious convictions gave strength to many facing execution, perhaps none more dramatically than Thomas Cranmer, the Archbishop of Canterbury. Condemned for heresy during Queen Mary I's Catholic Restoration, Cranmer was sentenced to be burned at the stake in 1556. Under extreme pressure, Cranmer had earlier signed recantations of his Protestant beliefs. But as he faced the flames, he made a stunning reversal. His final words shocked the crowd. "As for the Pope, I refuse him as Christ's enemy and Antichrist. And as for the sacrament, I believe as I have taught in my book against the Bishop of Winchester." Then, in an act that witnesses would never forget, Cranmer thrust his right hand, the one that had signed his recantations, directly into the flames before the rest of his body caught fire. "This hand hath offended," he declared, "this unworthy right hand." As the flames consumed him, Cranmer remained stoic, keeping his hand in the fire until it was charred beyond recognition, a final defiant statement of his true beliefs that inspired generations of Protestant martyrs. Before we delve into the eerie last words of those condemned in history's witch trials, I'd like to thank you for watching Nefarious History. If you'd be so kind, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps bring more of these stories to you. Thanks to all who do. The witch trials that swept through Europe and colonial America produced some of history's most disturbing executions and some of its most defiant last words. No case illustrates this better than Giles Corey, an 81-year-old farmer accused during the Salem Witch Trials of 1692. When Corey refused to enter a plea of guilty or not guilty, the court ordered him to be subject to peine forte et dure, pressing by heavy stones until he either entered a plea or died. For 2 days, Corey lay on the ground with boards placed over his body. Stones were gradually piled onto the boards, crushing him slowly. Each time he was asked to plead, Corey gave the same response: "More weight." These 2 words, repeated as his ribs cracked and his breathing became labored, transformed a simple farmer into a symbol of extraordinary resistance. Corey knew that if he pleaded and was convicted, his property would be seized by the government, leaving his children nothing. By refusing to plead until death took him, he ensured his heirs would inherit his land. Sheriff George Corwin reportedly stood on the boards at one point to add his own weight to the stones. According to witnesses, as Corey neared death, his tongue protruded from his mouth. The sheriff pushed it back in with his cane. Corey's final defiant words of "more weight," some accounts say they were his very last utterance before death, have echoed through American history as a testament to resistance against judicial tyranny. Across the Atlantic, witchcraft accusations claimed thousands more victims, including French priest Urbain Grandier, whose case inspired the novel The Devils of Loudun. Convicted of making a pact with the devil and bewitching an entire convent of Ursuline nuns, Grandier faced one of the most severe executions the Inquisition could impose. Before being burned alive in 1634, when offered a chance to confess and receive a merciful strangling before the flames reached him, Grandier refused, saying, "There is no salvation for me in falsehood." The execution was particularly gruesome. At Grandier's feet, a special fire was prepared with sulfur rather than regular wood, ensuring that the flames would burn hotter. When the fires were lit, witnesses reported that a sudden rain shower extinguished the flames twice, which many took as evidence of demonic intervention. Finally, on the 3rd attempt, Grandier burned. but his body reportedly would not fully consume in the flames. This resistance to burning, rather than being seen as evidence of his innocence, was interpreted as further proof of his supernatural protection. His last insistence on his innocence would haunt his accusers, many of whom would later admit to fabricating evidence against him. Perhaps the most disturbing category of last words are those that seem to reach beyond the grave, curses and prophecies that, whether by coincidence or something more sinister, actually came true. While Dr. Joseph-Ignace Guillotin didn't invent the device that bears his name, he advocated for its use as a humane form of execution during the French Revolution. Ironically, a popular myth claimed that he himself died by the very machine he championed. According to the legend, Guillotin's alleged last words were, "I die by the very invention I sought to reform." While this makes for a satisfying story, history tells us that Guillotin actually died of natural causes in 1814, never himself experiencing the humane death he had advocated for others. More chilling are the documented cases of execution victims who seem to predict the futures of those who condemned them. In France in 1647, a man convicted of murder allegedly looked directly at the judge who had sentenced him and declared, "Mark my words, within a year, the man who condemned me will stand here in my place." According to contemporary accounts, the judge laughed off the threat. Yet within 11 months, the same judge was falsely accused of corruption, swiftly convicted, and executed on the very spot where he had sent so many others to die. As he approached the scaffold, witnesses reported that he appeared terrified, constantly looking around as if expecting to see the ghost of the man who had cursed him. Perhaps the most famous curse in execution history surrounds Jacques de Molay, the last Grand Master of the Knights Templar. After enduring years of torture, de Molay was burned at the stake in Paris in 1314 on charges of heresy. As the flames rose around him, de Molay is said to have shouted, "Pope Clement, Chevalier Guillaume de Nogaret, King Philip, I summon you to the tribunal of heaven before the year is out." Within the year, all 3 men de Molay had named were dead. Pope Clement V died just a month later, afflicted by a sudden illness. Guillaume de Nogaret, Philip's minister who had orchestrated the Templars' arrests, died within the month as well. Finally, King Philip IV, who had ordered the dissolution of the Templars to seize their vast wealth, died in a hunting accident before the year's end. Coincidence? Perhaps. But the precision of de Molay's curse and the timing of the deaths became the foundation for what some call the Templars' curse, a curse that some believe continues to this day when Friday the 13th, the date of the original arrest of the Templars, is still considered unlucky. What makes last words so powerful? Is it simply that they represent a person's final chance to control their own narrative? Or is there something more profound happening in those last moments, when the mask of life falls away and a person confronts eternity? Some used their last breath to proclaim innocence, others to curse their executioners, and a few to make peace with their fate. But all of them, knowing death was seconds away, chose words they hoped would echo beyond their own mortality. And echo they have. Centuries later, we still analyze, debate, and sometimes fear these final utterances. They remind us that words spoken at the edge of mortality carry a weight that normal speech cannot match. If you found this journey through history's darkest statements fascinating, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to Nefarious History. Each week, we explore the forgotten corners of history that textbooks often overlook.